Hello, everybody. Today, myself and Ben are joined by Emmett and Zach from Cubicle 7, and we're going to be having a chat about an exciting new project upcoming for a fantastic world of magic, steam, and horror, Victoriana. So, gentlemen, pleasure to have you on the channel.
Yeah, thanks, folks. Thanks for having us back again.
Well, you know, we can't keep you away for long.
Yeah.
Battering down the door on us. But obviously, as a way of an introduction, Emmett, we've spoke to you before. You are Cubicle 7's creative director. But Zach, you're exciting and new on the channel, so you're going to be the producer for Victoriana. You tell us a bit about yourself and what's going to be involved on your side then.
Yeah, I'm the producer for Victoriana and a developer at Cubicle 7. So my background is I love C7 and work with them. And in the past, I've worked across the Warhammer range that we have on Soulbound and Wrath and Glory and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And my job in Victoriana is effectively to wrangle creatives and ensure that everything gets done on time. But that means I get to see all the juicy details that come through from the writers and the artists and the layout. So yeah, it's very fun.
Showing off. And what we're here to talk about today then is a new edition of Victoriana. So we have here the cover of the Player's Guide. Exciting and new. But I think first things first, what is Victoriana? If people are unaware of previous editions, then what should they expect?
The tagline we throw on everything is steampunk gothic horror in an alternate history Victorian London fantasy world.
It's a lot already.
It's a lot.
It is a good subtitle.
The best explanation I think to give a lot of folks who are familiar with RPGs is sort of like Shadowrun, but in Victorian England.
Sounds good. Yeah.
I think. But Zach, you can probably answer better yourself on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting mix of like steampunk and fantasy together, and using that kind of alternate history to give you like a real world that you can play in that feels familiar, but have that little bit of magic, that little bit of steampunk. And it's what you expect and a bit more from like going back to London and having like Tesla coils and things like that around. So it's like a cinematic vision of the past with Elderen and all different lineages and things like that, and electric guns. Just pulpy adventures with that Sherlock Holmes feel.
Yeah. So in the world, it basically the fantasy races as you kind of know them. So Elderen are kind of like our elf equivalent. We have Chaldee, who are sort of like a combination of dwarves and gnomes and halflings all rolled into one. Grugak are a bit like sort of like ogres, I guess, but they are different. And then we have the Moorlocks, who are from Lochmoor. And yeah, I guess so on the surface some people might look like orcs, but I think a part of changing the names of all of the kind of fantasy races isn't just for the sake of it. It kind of it removes a little bit of the baggage that comes with them, because they're different. They have a different place in Victorian society in Victoriana, and they've always been around. So it's not like there's a rift has opened and the fantasy races have flooded in. They've kind of always been part of the history. And then, centuries ago, there was this great cataclysm. And since then, magic has started to wane and drift out of the world. It's still present, but it's kind of slowly fading away. And then you have the rise of like science and that kind of thing, or magitech. So all the kind of scientific leaps forward are fueled by magic, but once people have discovered it, it kind of doesn't need magic anymore. It's this quite interesting thing where that leads into the class struggle, and by class I don't mean D&D class, it's social class. So we have
the first big change that we had to make. It was like, are we talking about class or class here?
That's another interesting thing. Even just before we get into that, is the races, as we think of them from a fantasy trope, aren't distinctly defined races really in Victoriana. They're all Homo sapiens subspecies.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're orcs, they're very different from us, everybody is some form of hominid, and with that, do the subspecies or races that people prefer, do they occupy different levels of class within society? Are there whipping boys at the bottom because they're goblins, or is it just a pure mix throughout?
No. So basically, we call them lineages because they've come down from that Homo sapien thing. But they are all at different levels of society. I think, and Zach can correct me on that. I think often we see a lot of the aristocrats or the upper class, the noble class. Many of them tend to be elves or Eldaran, because the Eldaran were a bit more tied to the magic, and at one time that kind of led to a bit more power.
Yeah,
but it's much more leveled out.
That was kind of a religious thing, because obviously in a world where magic and myth existed, religion kind of took a completely different course in Victoriana. And the people that could talk to what we would consider gods were usually the Eldaran. They were all born with psychic abilities, which now that's kind of spread out among the lineages. But back in like medieval times, it was thought that only Eldaran were allowed to talk to the gods, and they used that to become nobility. But it's kind of it's a very civilized Victorian time in that there's people of every lineage at every level of society. It's fair in that way, but there's still the typical Victorian unfairness of the nobility kind of getting a lot from the working class.
It's what the plebs are for, though, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's one of our lovely plebs here. This is a nice little gadgeteer, and he is a puka, or a part animal person. So you can see he's got the little rabbit ears there and a nice furred skin. But again, you'd get them at every level of society, but they do confer in-game bonuses to skill checks and things like that. But they'll never, you'll never hit a situation where you can't get into a noble party because of your rabbit ears.
Right. Yeah.
But if they don't match
as
your
is so often the case.
No rabbit ears, no entry. The puka are kind of a fun one as well, or the pucks as we call them, because again, it ties a little bit into the Midsummer Night's Dream and that kind of thing. But they can have different animalistic features and different levels of it. So you might have like Sam that we showed there, who is kind of has the rabbit ears, but then you could have someone who literally just has the head of a lion and it's just like a human body, and they would tend to be kind of larger and more muscular. But again, you could have the puka and all the lineages can be born to all different combinations of the lineages. So an Eldaran could have a Grugak child. Now, Zach, you can correct me on that because you might be more up to date on the
no,
text.
That's absolutely correct. That is how it is, and it's very common. They still don't really know how science works in the world, as you said, because it was a magical world, and whenever they kind of discover something and everyone accepts it to be true, the magic leaves it, and that's how magic dies. It becomes science at that point. Like, one of the really interesting things is, because we're now in 1887 in the timeline of Victoriana, electricity has become a big deal, and people in the world are debating whether electricity is magic or science. Because to them, they're like, this looks pretty magical to me. I think this is magic. And they're like, no. We have rules for how this works. But that spreads to the lineages as well. And people don't know exactly where a lot of their history comes from, which is why there's kind of a level playing field. And you can see here, there's a little fox guy in the bottom of this image who's very cute.
Rocking an excellent hat.
Oh, excellent hats are very important.
There's a whole section on hats in our art guide to for the artists. Like, well, now nobility can wear top hats, but no one else can wear top hats. That's the rule. That's what identifies you as a noble.
That makes sense. Interesting. You've shifted forward about 20 years.
20 years, yeah.
Is there much that's happened in between? Because obviously, if people are aware of the earlier editions of Victoriana 1856, in our own timeline, there's the end of one war, the beginning of another war, the American Civil War breaks out. There's a lot goes on in that period for us. Does Victoriana follow a similar timeline, or are you moving away from just following what we know as our history for the Victorian
Yeah,
period?
I think generally the way we handle it is basically the world levels itself out.
Mhm.
It's not like only the English have magic. It's everyone in the world has it. So kind of, the major events in history pretty much happen how they did. They might have happened at different times,
Mhm.
but generally like history kind of levels itself out with some changes, obviously. But that's pretty much how they play how that plays out. Zach, do you more on that? Obviously, you're more
Yeah, I think I have
history.
a little quote from that here. Like, I have something from a product that should be coming around before too long. Yeah, like this is just an example, but the Battle of Waterloo, which is obviously quite long past now,
Mhm.
was decided by a few well-placed fireballs thrown by the Duke of Wellington and his
Sounds great. Yeah.
wyvern riding escort coming in at the right time. So that's the kind of thing that you can expect, is
Mhm.
that like
Nice. Yeah.
the broad strokes are the same, but the minutiae is all tied to
Mhm.
kind of a magical world. So like
Yeah.
the Crimean War is over. And it is indeed Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. So it's a really exciting year to be in London, where we're kind of focused for at least the first short while, because London's fascinating enough in itself. So it's still quite close to history, but basically we've changed everything in the name of fun that needed to be changed.
Yeah,
The
basically. Yeah.
broad strokes are there.
Sounds cool. Well, so one thing I was very interested in, obviously you say it's a fascinating and interesting time to be in London within the world of Victoriana. What's the kind of like the storylines and the tales and the exploits that your adventuring group sort of is guided into when it comes to this version of Victoriana? Sort of like what's the kind of aim for a lot of different people to go off and adventure and become heroes and stuff?
We frame the party essentially, and it's something that we've done in a lot of our games because it's easier to pull people together and go, this is why you are together, similar to Soulbound, and we've done it in some other things as well. But one of the first things you do in Victoriana is you make your association. You are all associates of a particular association. I think we have like Willowpin and Associates, who are basically detectives. We have lower class, like kind of almost gangs and things like that, but that defines what type of adventures you want to play. But the thing about having your association is you are an unusual element in society, because your association contains people from all the different social classes,
right?
And you all work together, which would obviously be monocle dropping horrendous for a lot of people to see it.
Oh my days.
Bow ties
Yeah, exactly.
Spinning as soon as they see you. It would just be really bad.
Yeah. So, and we have we haven't announced it, but we can. But we're working on an adventure book as well called Dreadful Inquiries. Zach, do you want to run down some of the adventures that are in that? Might give a good idea of the kind of stuff that we'll be doing.
Yeah, I mean it's very much what you'd expect, like the Sherlock Holmes two-fisted pulp adventures. Like it assumes that kind of you're working as a Willowpin and Associates type of group, like private detectives or consulting detectives, because in some cases you do work with Scotland Yard. It's very much there is a murder and a grieving relative will come to you, and then you have to navigate through all the different parts of London society to try and find out who did it. And in some cases, just because someone's been murdered doesn't mean they can't be the criminal or still be at large and killing. That's the kind of fun stuff that you can get from Victoriana. There is a very fun adventure about haunted factories and demons being bound to like the old looms and things like that. Just loads of weird, wacky stuff that we wanted to get into the first book to give you a taste of every part of society. So you go from kind of gutter running in the back rooms of pubs, having barroom brawls, just trying to get scraps of paper as clues, all the way up to like super spy working and like maybe going to see the Queen or members of Parliament at some point, and like zip lining between buildings, breaking into libraries, getting into the British Museum. So there's that balance of investigation, social intrigue, where it's not just interrogation, it's also like, because Victorian society is so conservative, talking your way into parties, getting into people's good graces to get them to help you later. and then good old-fashioned fisticuffs when you need to as well.
Sounds good. Yeah.
A big part of what we've done. Walt, I'm going to pronounce his name wrong. Chakowski is our lead developer on this, and Walt worked on I think he led Vic third edition as well, and worked on second edition. So Walt is completely steeped in this. One of the things he's created with the Vic for 5e is everyone has contacts, and contacts are a really big thing, and who you are and who your group is and their place in London and who you know is really important. So you can call on contacts for protection, or if you're on the run, you can be like, oh, I know if I go into this bar, they'll let me into a back room and I can hide in there, or I know someone in Scotland Yard, or I know an occultist who can actually perform a seance to contact the spirit of the person who's been killed. And so I think you start with like different tiers of contact, but you start with like at least 2, and your party gets 2, it gets 1 or 2 as well. So you have these connections that you can call on once per adventure. Use a per penny dreadful to use them to kind of open doors that wouldn't be open to you, or get information. So it's a really, really nice way of doing things, and really I think really expands on that investigation pillar of D&D. It works really, really nicely.
One of the interesting things that I tacked onto there then is it feels like, obviously this is a fantastical world with lots of amazing things for you to go and explore, but it feels like your characters aren't sort of like wandering into it for the first time and sort of being like, oh, what is all this stuff around me? They have lived and breathed the world of Victoriana. And so it kind of lends a little bit more of like kind of like expertise to what you're doing, which I think sounds really nice. And I'm getting that really awesome feeling of like having a nice map of London for us to sit down and look over and be like, well, I know all these streets and I know what I'm doing.
Exactly. Yeah, it's quite cool seeing those places that are recognized, but like slightly tweaked. Like Piccadilly Circus, and I think we're looking doing the Tower Bridge at the moment, because it's right after Tower Bridge burnt down. Am I right, Zach?
It's still being constructed right now.
Right.
Well, partially. I think I'm not sure if that's real world Victoriana. Like, it's kind of crossing boundaries in my head at the moment.
Everything blurs together.
Yeah. I suppose one of the things about the groups in Victoriana is they've consciously made a decision to come together. We have this kind of meta plot of something bad is coming. And it's, from beyond, and that is coming, and it's this existential threat, and your group are some of the people who've seen that and have decided, they are going to work together to try and stop that, or, protect people or whatever. So there is this kind of, you consciously decided to come together and almost be ostracized in the society for, being a noble person who is working with a prole or a bourgeoisie.
So one of the cool things you were mentioning there is obviously this move between different editions, and obviously now you're using the OGL system, which is a lot of people have played recently over the last couple of years for D&D and stuff. So what was it like doing that?
Using this cool new indie system. This I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
It's going to be big. It's going to be big in a couple of years. So what was it like transitioning over from previous editions into this 5th edition style of rules? And sort of like, what was kind of the fun things you've done? You've already talked about how you've kind of included things like investigations and that kind of thing, but what else was it like sort of diving into that? Yeah,
so I suppose one of the interesting things about Victoriana is it's never used the same system across any edition.
Yeah.
But just to really confuse people, we had Vic 1st, 2nd, and 3rd edition. Now we're releasing Vic 4 5e, so for 5th edition, but then in the future we're probably going to release Victoriana 4th edition, which will be its own bespoke rule set as well. So just to really confuse people.
Of course.
Yeah. But I suppose one of the things is, looking at, I've seen some folks online talking about, this is, D&D isn't the system to do Victoriana, to do investigation games. And I mean, I think, the OGL rules are a tool that you can use.
Yeah.
I think, when we did Adventures in Middle-earth, people kind of said the same thing. You can't play Lord of the Rings in D&D. It doesn't feel like it. But what we did in that was basically we took apart, a very important part of the Lord of the Rings, which was the IP, and also an underutilized part of the 5th edition rules, which was travel. Travel and journeys were really important. But in the regular D&D, they're kind of just, it'll be a random encounter or whatever. But we expanded on that, and the travel rules became really, really interesting. The books won awards and all that kind of stuff. And then I've used the rules myself in running, official D&D campaigns, but I'll take the Adventures in Middle-earth rules and use them there for that. So with Victoriana, it was kind of the same thing. With the 5th edition rules, you can just slap some character classes on and new races, and you're good to go. But one of the things we always like to do is go, okay, well, here's the D&D or the 5th edition rules that but here's something that we've woven into it or layered on top of it that enhances a part of the game. Not to add too much complexity, because that's always the risk. You try and change too many things. So we just try and change one or two things here or there. So for investigation, we have like aha moments, which is if you missed a clue, you can do this thing, and the GM will tell you the clue that you missed. Aha. The character creation actually uses like life path character creation. So you roll to get your social class and your lineage and all these events and what happened in your childhood, and that gives you proficiencies in a certain skill, or what happened in your adolescence and you get a +1 bonus to your strength or something like that. So there's really nice stuff like that throughout it as you build your character. It builds a story, but also it'll build your contacts, and it gives you a place in London just from going through character creation, which is really, really nice. But coming over, I mean, things translated relatively well. When we were looking at it, like, okay, well, what would this be in D&D? And there's been, I would say, Zach, there's been a number of changes from previous editions of Victoriana, because I'd say, previous editions of Victoriana, we had like ogres and elves and things like that, but now they're called something different in this. So this is, reimagining is the wrong word, but it's like there's a little bit of reinvention that has happened with it.
Yeah, and like you said, a lot of it is in the hands of Walt, who has been either playing or writing since 1st edition. So he just understands Victoriana inside and out, and cares so much about the fans, to the point where he's just like, we have to do this now. This one first, please. So what's come out of it, I think, is it's such a good merger of the two things, but they've sat together very comfortably. Like even Walt was like, he was surprised at how well things would fit together, and it's not just like the combination of how we see playing Victoriana with that emphasis on investigation and socialization, and 5e coming together, but also the mechanics and the new mechanics meshing with the setting as well. So everything kind of ties together. For instance, something like your contacts, which you get through your life path, one of the roles, which is what we call the character classes, lets you just get more of them because you're super social. And it's things like that, like focusing in on the pillars of play that aren't as examined by the OGL as it is a standard, but we get to expand on those, and hopefully people will really enjoy playing through those parts of the game.
Yeah, it's definitely a slightly lower powered, and there's definitely much less of a combat focus on it. It's more so, you play through your adventure, and then at the end it's like big fight time, but it's not, you're not fighting your way through the whole thing. But again, when you're looking at, what does Victoria have? It has inventors, and it has gadgeteers, and it has wizards, and it has like cut purses and thugs who go around brawling. It's like, so it has fighters and rogues and wizards and artificers and a lot of those things translate quite well.
It felt quite nice that it feels again like you've kind of taken the basis of what makes that system good and then basically bolted on loads of really awesome additional things, so that if someone, for example, is coming from playing traditional Dungeons and Dragons and they want something a little bit different that fits into a new genre, they can easily translate over into this and then get their teeth into all the additional mechanics and things that you've built into it. Sounds pretty cool,
absolutely. I mean, that was one of the big things for us, is make sure it's still D&D, because a part of the reason is, introduce people to Victoriana, and D&D is very popular. It's a good way of introducing people to Victoriana, but it has to still feel like it, the 5e rules work and they are popular for a reason. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can tack some stuff on, but we don't need to go changing everything. And I think there was a couple of times during development we went, actually, hang on, we're changing too much. We're making a different rule system now. It just happens to have
everything will be driven by D4.
But it's little things like, okay, well, strength, dex, con, int, wisdom, charisma. It's like, why don't we change wisdom to willpower? Because that's kind of more like what it is. And we were going through things like that, and at some point you change them, and you're kind of just changing them for the sake of it, almost with the rules.
On that note, So the player's guide is coming, and it will have to introduce people who have never seen Victoriana before. What's the breakdown like in the book itself? Is 50% backstory, lore, world building, and then the other 50% the mechanics and the character creation, or is it a lesser or greater split? What sort of thing can people expect from the player's guide?
It's a good. I think it has to be an introduction to Victoriana for people who don't know it. So there's bits there's a couple of pages at the start to give you broad strokes. This is Victoriana. This is the themes and tones that you'll be playing around with. It's about investigation. It's about class struggle. And then there's a chunkier chapter towards the back half of the book that about 20 or 30 pages, I can't quite remember, that about the big smoke. So about London itself. And then obviously, the world building is built throughout as you're reading through character classes and all that kind of stuff that's built throughout it. But it's there's a decent introduction to Victorian London there, and then more will come through the adventures, and then hopefully next year we'll actually be releasing the big smoke, a book and like a guide to London, to Victoriana London.
But the one in the back at the moment, it's a little bit over 30, I think. It's quite nice, but it's not just a guide to here are some places in London that you might go. It's also the kind of lives that people lead. What is this kind of conservative Victorian society with magic like? What do people do for fun? How do people kind of dress and interact with each other? What's different for work? So it should give you kind of a very comprehensive and streamlined way to get into the world that works with that. The life path character generation, it will give you like a wedge of information, and then you'll find out more as you play.
I was going to say that seems like a really interesting element there, that you kind of, if you were coming to this fresh, and maybe, for example, your games master or your dungeon master has read the book in its entirety almost. When you sit down to make your character, it feels like you'll be able to get all those little nice tidbits of kind of like how your character came to be, and then that informs your understanding of Victoriana as you go. And then you can be like, oh, so I rolled this on a table. I'll go to this page and find out a little bit more about that kind of thing, which I think is really, really cool. And it kind of makes the learning process part of the game, as it were, I guess, which is cool.
Yeah, and one of the things as well, because we've jumped ahead, there is some callbacks to previous editions or, adventures and characters that you might remember from other editions. I think when I was running one of the adventures, there's a bit where you have to go to a funeral, but the funeral is actually held in the Beanstalk, which is this big tower. It's like an airship landing pad. And it's a noble funeral, and they go on the airship, and then they're brought to a cemetery or kind of necropolis that's kept outside of London because like a few years ago, there was an undead uprising in the city, which is actually one of the adventures that we had written for 3rd edition. So like, you're not allowed to be buried in London anymore because we don't want, that's how you get zombies.
Don't want zombies.
Yeah.
I like that. I also like the fact that depending on what way your life path takes you, you may be in a position where you're so not quite the dregs of society, but certain things just won't be there for you because you don't realize they exist, or it's above your pay grade essentially, and you have a very defined idea of what you think your London is because your London is the borough you're from and these few streets around your home. And yeah, sure, those people do that sort of thing in the center of town or at the embankment, but I never go near them. They're nothing to me. Tug forelock, move on.
Yeah, there's a really, I think the class struggle and the tension between science and magic is a really big part of it, and they go hand in hand because you have the nobility who are kind of clinging to the old ways, and even in their dress, their style is a couple of years, like it's about 30 years out of date. Whereas the bourgeois, they've like clockwork limbs and bits and bobs and all these accoutrements, and they're very modern, like what you would expect from 1887 Victorian fashion. And then you have the proletariat who are kind of stuck in the factories working, but there is this revolution running through where they're becoming much more aware of the disparity. So there's a lot of really nice tension in there as well. I think one of the more interesting things is the nobility. Just because you're a noble family doesn't mean you're rich. Like you might be in debt, like hugely in debt, and you actually can't afford anything, but you're a noble family and you have this responsibility. So
you have one servant now, not 10.
Yeah, exactly.
Been selling off the silverware for years just to upkeep the house and maintain the facade. On the subject then of I suppose, Victoriana and London itself. You were saying there was a book coming up for the Big Smoke, but will you be pushing beyond just London itself with some of the books for the 5e edition?
Yeah,
are we going to see the colonies brought into it and things like that?
Yeah, it's some interesting stuff that we've kicked around. So the initial wave is Player's Guide, Bestiary with loads of monsters to fight, and the adventure book as well, which would be really nice. We've talked about the Big Smoke book. I think one of the things we'd love to do is like Chicago could be really interesting.
Nice.
I want to go to Dublin and see what the 1916 Rising looks like with magic. Probably just as horrifying.
Sure, yeah, I imagine so. Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, like I think we could go anywhere in the world. There was one of the comment on the post was will we be exploring other cities like the commenter I think was Polish. They're asking would you be going to Warsaw and things like that. And I think we'd love to do that kind of stuff, but I think you also you have to get the right people to write those. Sure. We're not the people to write that. Zach, you're possibly in London now, but Walt is American, but Walt's been with Vic for years.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, Walt's from Chicago, so it was a natural fit.
Exactly. Yeah,
and I moved to London, so I was like, it looks like this. I get it now.
Yeah,
it all makes sense. No, I'm just thinking because one of the things about the Victorian period for me is that there's a whole slew of what they called Victoria's Little Wars, where there were all of these tiny wars and factions and uprisings that kicked off very distinctly different places around the globe. And the idea of tying some of that in would be fascinating, where you've not just got the national identity, but also the subspecies, the races involved there as well, and it adds a whole new dynamic to what's going on there. And then if you have that sort of sprinkling of almost the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, where people are deliberately trying to start wars for the financial benefits, you could do a whole Victoriana across the globe. That just appeals.
Jerry's going to send you some bullet points.
Yeah.
But again, there's so much immediately.
PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, but it immediately sparks those kind of thoughts. So I think that there's a ton of stuff that we could do there, which would all be really exciting. I think.
Are there any particular areas, Zach, that you've been fascinated by when it comes to like where you'd want to go next and stuff? Because obviously we've had it like Chicago and that kind of thing. But is there anywhere that was like, I'd love to go there?
London is big enough for me at the moment because I just see the writing and the art coming in, and I'm like, I have to look at all of this. No, I think it's all very fascinating. I think that one of the things that we're doing is we are, with this edition, finally delivering on the promises of the last two with this kind of coming existential threat to the world of Victoriana, which if you're interested in something like a large war, then this will be something along those lines. And it deals with the kind of Victorian era and even going into the next century kind of warfare, but with a more magical kind of perspective.
Interesting.
It's like, you're dealing, these kind of interdimensional elder god type being things potentially coming through and becomes something different entirely.
At least it finally explains what happens with the Ripper murders, which happen next year in your timeline. Clearly that is just some cultist attempting to spark everything. Spoilers, by the way, folks. Although I have no idea if that is the case, but I'm going to run with it.
Yeah, those kind of things are very interesting to look at, because it's, if saying, a demon made me do it, kind of lessens how horrifying that was. So it's an interesting line to try and thread, because there's some cool stuff we can do with the occult type stuff. But when you have that kind of thing, if you have such a notorious, horrible person, you don't want to give the legacy an out of a spooky ghost made me do it.
Well, the alternative is they spend their entire time investigating what they suspect is just an occult murder spree by some bunch of priests, and then at the end it turns out it is just
a normal
people are the monsters.
Horrendous man.
You were Spring Boot School.
Yeah, you were talking about sort of artwork and sort of like how you've been delving into all of that at the moment. Obviously, we've seen the cover image, which was fantastic by Antonio De Luca, and we've seen some of the sort of snippets of the artwork that we're going to find inside the book as well.
Yeah, so Antonio De Luca has done the cover for us. Antonio's done some really good stuff for us in the past. But we're looking up, obviously, we have our in-house team who are hugely talented and experienced, and a wide variety of freelancers that work with us. One of the nice things with Victoriana, with our being our own IP, is we had to go and figure out what it should look like, I guess. Like there's been a couple of editions of it, but also, we need to put that visual style on it and see what it looks like. We've a very talented team of artists who are hugely excited to go in. We basically were like, okay, here's a couple of days, just go do some concept artwork on it. Mm-hmm. And, they're kids in a candy store, getting to do that kind of stuff. But I think in particular, one of our artists, JG, whose piece this is on screen at the moment, JG has a background in kind of history and is just hugely enthusiastic about it. So JG wrote up a document. It was like, this is the materials they were building with at the time. Because of the advent, there was way more metal around. There was way less wood, metal, and you're just like, oh God, there's so much information. But it's great because it gives it that kind of authenticity. And then Rune, who's one of our other artists, he would dive into the fashion. It's like, this is what it looked like then. This is exactly what people were dressing. And we'd be able to go, okay, well, the bourgeois would be dressed like this, but the nobility would actually be like 1850. So we could change that around and go back to that. That piece of sand there is one of Rune's pieces. So
I've learned so much about corseting in the past few months. It is astonishing. They had very complex fashion back then.
Yeah, I mean, we have a whole like a visual style documents and PowerPoints and stuff that the artists and writers can flick through to get an idea of. We kind of have rules that we tend to use where the like the prole, the kind of lower class, their clothes are often multi-layered. They're made from kind of whatever is to hand, so you have like quite bright and unusual patterns, like oh well, they tore down a pair of curtains to make their slacks or something like that. So you have a lot of patterns, a lot of layers, and then they have kind of like talismans and stuff because some of them would be a bit more superstitious. With the bourgeois, then we're looking at those. Okay, well, they should be more. This is what you expect Victorian 1887 Victorians to look like, but they have a lot of like clockwork stuff on them because they're very much. They're like the factory owners and they're all about advancing technology and science. So they have all that. So they're kind of this interesting contrast of grays and navies, but with like copper and gold, like clockwork limbs or accoutrements.
Very cool. Yeah.
And then the nobility were, they obviously, the appearances are a big thing, but they are behind the times. So we actually went much more gothic with them, where they kind of feel like almost like vampiric. They're a bit out of touch. That's kind of that very much gothic lighting and dress and kind of bright red.
I'm getting vibes of What We Do in the Shadows, but in Victoriana.
Yeah.
Probably exactly the same clothing from them.
Yeah. You're eating worms. Yeah, such good. But yeah, so it was quite interesting to go through that because obviously we have we work with the Warhammer IPs and things like that, and you can just go make it look more Warhammer.
Yeah,
and everyone knows what that means.
Yeah.
Whereas, if we say make it look more Victoriana-y, you get like a head tilt. It's like, what do you mean?
Bustles. Everybody should have bustles.
Yeah.
But everyone should have bustles. We did try putting bustles on a hat a couple of times, and I think that's going to go somewhere at some point, but we'll see. But what was really fascinating was the concepting and the art is also now starting to influence how we think about the game design as well, and like getting into parties and things like that, being dressed appropriately, like having conditions associated with your appearance. It's like adding on to, again, it's like very small, easy to digest additions to 5e that play into the setting and are like brought out by the art itself. So if you're a little bit dirty from a fight, you're not going to get in anywhere.
Yeah, the doorman will turn you away. Don't even bother trying to talk to anybody else.
Exactly, yeah.
It certainly sounds fascinating across the board for what you're doing to, I suppose, expand and open up the world of Victoriana to a whole host of new gamers and players across the board. I think we've probably given enough people some information to whet their appetites.
Well, I've got one more question, and I always sneak this in, and I know it annoys all designers, but here we go. So, hopefully, I assume you've been playing it quite a lot. So the cool thing for me would be to know if you've got any cool characters that you've been playing or that you've met as NPCs and things that can give people a taste of kind of like who they could be if they were diving into the world of Victoriana.
I always end up running the game.
I know, Emmett. I know.
That's the problem.
That's why I put the NPC in thing, just in case you'd made one.
Yeah. What was your one, Zach? Murloc Holmes.
Oh, Murloc Holmes is terrible. That was for concept art because we'd only just decided the name for the Murlocs, and I actually have a worse one from a game that I'm GMing. Like the big villain is called Havelock Stone. And
nice.
He's hired by the police in the same way that you are, and he turns up to the crime and solves it in a completely incorrect way. But everyone believes him.
Of course.
So that's kind of part of the adventure, is catching this idiot out. But that's my favorite. But yeah, he's got
Very cool.
A clockwork eye that spins around and can analyze the entire scene. But then he just gets it wrong. So I don't know. Maybe you do want to play that kind of character. It's up to you.
I think a lot of my players would play that character anyway, even if they don't mean to. They start going, this is how this is broken down, and they'll just listen to it and go, yes, that, no. If that's what you believe.
It's amazing.
Here,
they're role-playing all their failures so well.
Yeah, I mean, and for me, I'm always a sucker for the kind of artificer type characters, but I really love the animist that we've done. Yeah. They kind of use like talismans and things. They're sort of like a warlock, I guess. They kind of, how would you describe them?
They actually are kind of unique. Like,
yeah.
At the start, they were this is a very strange reference, but even like a shaman kind of thing that would drop totems on the battlefield. But like it's evolved so much to being, they can cast unique spells into items and then give those to anyone. So it would be, it's got this kind of a slight voodoo element where you like pull a string tied to a rock and then suddenly your skin hardens, like that kind of thing. Cool. Very old school, kind of earthy, primitive magic that still survived into Victorian times.
Mm-hmm. We went through so many name changes on different roles and lineages and stuff. It's hard to keep track of what's what. Because I think we had one that was just an investigator. It's like, we can't call them an investigator. We're calling the characters investigators. And then we changed that to associates. They were like, oh well, now I guess we can call that an investigator. And, we have our dodger, which is kind of our rogue type. I'm a sucker for. I just want to basically do Assassin's Creed in London. That's what I want to do.
And on that note, if anybody has any questions about Victoriana and the expansion into 5th edition, drop them below. We'll pass them across to Zach and Emmett and try and wrangle an answer for you. Otherwise, let us know below what you think about Victoriana and the smoky steampunk fantasy-esque world of London that it will be bringing to the tabletop. Until next time, folks, bye-bye.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.